Hello, everyone. Welcome to a little live Q&A. We're going to talk some updates here. Also talk a little bit UFC Vegas 82, where we have Paul Craig taking on Brendan Allen in an interesting middleweight fight. But I also wanted to take a little look back at UFC 295 and talk some betting strategy as well. So we'll talk a few different options on the table here, a few different discussions. I want to thank everybody for coming back and tuning in here. This has been a fantastic run. It's a labor of love for me to be putting out content on a regular basis, and also took some suggestions from a Twitter post that I put out yesterday, asking for what type of content are we looking for, and had some questions posed to me as well. So we'll touch on that. But first off, wanted to talk a little betting strategy and just share one tool that I've used consistently for many years. It's what I consider a dollar cost average approach. This is something that I don't see implemented on a regular basis in the MMA betting world, but what it consists of is getting in at different price points in the lead up to bouts. So, for instance, let's take Jared Gordon, for instance. Last week at UFC 295, I get in on Jared Gordon at minus 175, and then I would go back and hit the line again. So I'd hit the line again at minus 177. And then throughout the course of the week, I got in at minus 187 as well. And I believe Jared ended up closing somewhere in the neighborhood of minus 210 or so. But the moral of the story here is it's one way to avoid getting burned by a bad line. Sometimes you are able to time the line correctly, and that's a skill in itself. But also, if you do have firm conviction on a specific play, then you may want to take multiple stabs at it throughout the course of the week. And I did that with Jared Gordon. I've done it traditionally throughout the course of my MMA betting career. If I do have a firm stance on a play, I'll go out of my way and hop in at a few different price points. And you can have an idea of where the line's headed, but sometimes the public takes the line, or the sharps take the line in a certain direction that you're not necessarily prepared for, and it may put you in a situation where you're getting in on a line at a much better price. I'll share another situation. Lupita Godinez. I got in on Lupita Godinez at, I believe, minus 172 at one point, and then the line ended up closing. So I got in on Lupita Godinez at minus 120, also at minus 148. And those were some solid plays that ended up cashing. But if I was to take Godinez at minus 172, and then that's that, it wouldn't leave me an opportunity to get in at a much better price. So that's why I try to get in at dollar cost average throughout different price points during the week. It helps you prevent getting burned by certain lines. And if you do have a strong position out there, that's one way to tackle that. So just wanted to put that out there. And the other thing is, there's no shame in passing on a play. I have to put that advice out there as well, because when we're breaking down fights, let's say there are 13, sometimes 12, sometimes 10 fights on a card, I traditionally will take a position on 3, 4, sometimes 5 fights on a card, and you won't see me really digging into every single fight from a betting perspective and spreading units across 13 different fights. I try to pick out 3, 4, 5 total spots on a card. And if you look, I average 6.76 units risked per event, which it helps maximize profits while also minimizing losses. So you have to take that into consideration as well. So just talking a little bit betting strategy here. My personal take is if you're taking a measured approach, you can identify 3, 4, 5 positions on a card and then go from there. So wanted to throw that out there as well. If you do have some questions in the chat, feel free to post those. I see, let's see, Michael, my friend of friends, I have what appears to be bad news for Saturday. Oh, look at this. Lou is about to share something, waiting on full confirmation, but it appears that Parsons and Almeida are out of their fights. This is from a dependable source. Well, that's a shame to hear, Lou. Thank you for tuning in, by the way, today. I appreciate you. We have a bunch of comments in the section here. Jonathan Pierce taking on Joe Anderson Brito. Now, that's a fascinating bout where the line has been closing and closing, and you look at someone who's not too far from where I currently am. You have Fight Ready Zone Jonathan Pierce taking on Joe Anderson Brito in what should be a situation where we know Joe Anderson Brito early in fights is a powerhouse, a wrecking ball. And Jonathan Pierce, if he's able to make it through those first few minutes, which could potentially be very, very hairy, we saw against Christian Rodriguez and others, Jonathan Pierce can be put to the test. And the Joe Lozon fight, you saw the physicality in that fight. My goodness gracious. Pierce, if he comes out the other side after the first round, then it could potentially be clear sailing the rest of the way. We've seen Bill Algeo against Brito and others. Andre Fili against Brito. We've seen these folks compete, so we know exactly who they are in their stage in their career. But I'm leaning towards the Jonathan Pierce side. That's a good question. Let's see what else we got here. Pierce minus 155, minus 136. Now, yeah, I saw Jonathan Pierce currently at minus 130 or so. So interesting spot. I'll see where the line goes. I don't have an extremely strong conviction in that specific play. Let's also talk two-time division champs. That's something that was posed, I believe, Enfuego posed that last night. Two-time division champs. Who ranks the highest in my professional opinion? And I'd like to hear your take on it as well. I know everyone's fallen in love with Conor McGregor being a two-time champ, but then you also look at his inability to defend the belt. And granted, we know what he's done for the sport itself, but I'd say that McGregor is, man, that ship has sailed. That was catching lightning in a bottle for Conor McGregor. He is not the same fighter that he was, and his career, his mixed martial arts career, appears to be coming to a close. I highly doubt that Michael Chandler and Conor McGregor are going to lock horns inside of an octagon. I know USADA's leaving, and it looks like Conor McGregor strong-armed USADA in that spot, but I'm not a big believer in Conor McGregor, especially at this stage in his career, but also the way he called his own shots. And granted, he did that bout against Jose Aldo was something that was a shocker to me, but that left hand, he was able to put Aldo out. But what can you say? I'm looking back at two-time division champions. We have Daniel Cormier, who, the way, I know he had some help with the towel against Rumble Johnson, but the way he was able to storm through both light heavyweight and heavyweight, he ranks up there. That Alex Pereira, I want to see him defend the 205-pound belt, and then I'll have much more to say about Alex Pereira, because remember, Pereira is coming off of a fight that he was in a war with Yuri Prochazka, and some folks may potentially say that Prochazka, that stoppage wasn't necessarily fight ending worthy, but Mark Goddard made the call, and Prochazka is now at peace with it. Let's see. We've got Daniel is a fraud with no John Jones. Oh wow. Hey, you have a great point there in some respects. If Jones is there, then there would be no Cormier being double champ, and you could have had an Alex Pereira situation where he was following Israel Adesanya around, and I could have seen if Cormier moved up to heavyweight, John Jones would have moved up to heavyweight and then tackled that fight. So I agree with you in that regard, but I also see that the Gustafsson fights, and we know what Cormier is capable of, and the Dan Henderson Cormier fight, I go back to that fight often, and you go back to double champs, and if you want to consider Pride Fighting Championships as well, Dan Henderson is, in my eyes, one of the greatest fighters to walk the face of the earth, considering what he was able to accomplish in multiple divisions. I know he had some extra help with testosterone replacement therapy, but he went out and beat Fedor. He gave Rampage Jackson everything he had. And you go back to that Rampage Jackson fight against Dan Henderson, and I know folks out there who've been around the fight game for a long time, they'll remember that fight. Also, the Vanderlei Silva fights with Dan Henderson, very, very impressive, and he fought Vanderlei twice. The Shogun fights, there have been so many. So Dan Henderson, in my eyes, is one of the, if not, if you consider Pride Fighting Championships, I believe that he's one of the best of all time to ever pull it off. And Volkanovski, he came close, but he fought someone who can neutralize him in Islam Makhachev. And I'll be honest, I think Ilya Topuria is live to take out Volkanovski in a few months. So waiting on that betting line to be available at multiple places. So interesting, 2 division champs. It's an impressive feat. The real problem here is, though, it holds up divisions, and when you hold up divisions, you're slowing the sport down and you're preventing folks from competing for a title. So I'm not a fan of fighters doing it. I think we also have to mention Henry Cejudo. Henry Cejudo, fight ready, incredible fighter. The way he came back against Aljamain Sterling, I was at that fight in Newark. Very impressed by Henry Cejudo, and the theme here is a lot of great wrestlers have been able to pull it off. Dan was on Rogan's podcast talking about Pride, and very, very impressive on Dan Henderson's part. I'm going to go back and give the Rogan podcast a watch. I'll be honest, Shady, I haven't watched it, so I have to go check that out. So 2 division champs. Just want to talk on about Henry Cejudo, for instance, also the way he disposed of TJ Dillashaw, and Dillashaw was on all that EPO and what have you. Very impressive. Also, his fight against Dominic Cruz. You're saying that Cejudo didn't defend it long enough. While I agree with you, he did walk away from the sport for a couple years and then came back and fought Aljo, and look how competitive that fight was against Aljo. In my eyes, he's up there too. So if you ask me, I'd say Dan Henderson, Henry Cejudo, and then also, let's be honest with ourselves, John Jones. He may be the greatest of all time. I was hoping we'd get to see the fight against against Stipe, and I was heavily invested in John Jones against Stipe Miocic. Let's see, hands down, Amanda Nunes. Wow, hey, the Lioness. That's a great point. You mentioned Amanda Nunes and how she was able to win versus Valentina Shevchenko multiple times, and the way she went out, very, very nice to see that. She went out on her own terms, on top with the belt, and she was dancing, drinking beers in the octagon after she left. So Amanda Nunes is up there. But also, it's Father Time. No one can outrun Father Time, right? That's the even with the help of TRT. Another wrestler comes to mind also. It's amazing how we got this far and we haven't mentioned Randy the Natural Couture. Randy, also a Team Quest fighter, somebody who spent a lot of time in the training room and on the wrestling mats with Dan Henderson. They are fighters who have done great work at multiple weight divisions. So Henry Cejudo, Dan Henderson, Daniel Cormier, Randy Couture, great fighters. And they're folks who, had great cardio, and you could trust that they could kill time in top position, and kings of ground and pound. And you go back to even Mark Kerr and Don Fry and Mark Coleman, Hammerhouse. Man, they have some. I'm thinking back. How about George St. Pierre? Oh my God. I put out a quote the other night too, how you need confidence and courage and fear, and how important that is. Without fear, there is no courage. And Tom Aspinall received a video message from George St. Pierre that I really enjoyed seeing that also. That was interesting. Let's see. Nunes, the GOAT, limited competitors that didn't put up quite a challenge. Yeah, especially the fight against Cyborg. You bring up a great point looking back at it. And Mark Kerr, the Smashing Machine. By the way, that's another that's a documentary that was filmed out in Arizona and all over the United States. Great, and also in Japan. Great documentary. Love that film. If you want to take a walk on the wild side and look at the sport through multiple lenses, I recommend Mark Kerr and the Smashing Machine. Give that a watch when you have a few minutes. So let's talk belt predictions here. I think that Tom Aspinall, by the way, we cashed on Tom Aspinall last time out, and I believe that he may potentially be holding the belt for a long time. Although the heavyweight division, if you get caught at heavyweight, it only takes one strike to put your lights out. We saw Sergey Pavlovich go down, and we've seen him pounded out now twice. Last time was a while ago against Alistair Overeem. By the way, Alistair Overeem, probably the most highly skilled heavyweight fighter of all time. And granted, he spent a lot of time at light heavyweight. We know Ubereem and Ikonoreem. We're talking two-time division champions, but also folks who are great, tremendous fighters. So Tommy Aspinall, I believe that the arrow's pointed up for him, that he has a bright future, and he's going places. Tremendous documentary with Mark Coleman as well. And Bas Rutten was in the Smashing Machine also. I showed my parents that documentary. And one of the best scenes in that whole film is when Mark Kerr walks into a doctor's office and he's all busted up, and he's he's explaining what mixed martial arts is to an elderly lady in the waiting room who's asking, well, why do you do that? And he's explaining the actual art behind it, and how the folks do want to hurt each other. They want to win, right? So great documentary. So we cashed on Aspinall last time out, and I believe that he's going to hold the belt for a while. I'm not sure if John Jones is going to end up coming back. We got to see how he heals from this injury. And Miocic, you watched the way he looked when he was walking around Madison Square Garden there. He looks like he's done, man. I was heavily invested in John Jones versus that in that matchup, but it never came to fruition. I don't know if we're going to see Miocic compete again. And he doesn't have to compete anymore. He could potentially leave now as the greatest heavyweight champion of all time in the UFC. And but some folks have something in the basement, that they want to continue and find out who they are and test themselves. So we'll see if that ends up happening there. Then let's talk a little Diego Lopez. Also, Diego Lopez came out and smashed Pat Sabatini. Very impressive there. Enjoyed watching him perform, and Diego Lopez getting better every time out. And that's one thing I have to stress here too, is what you see on film, especially if you're watching a younger fighter. Folks, some fighters, they get better and better every time out, and you have a limited opportunity to take them out before they start fixing their holes. And John Jones was like that earlier in his career, but we saw him from fight to fight improve tremendously. And with Diego Lopez, I'm seeing someone who not only the confidence is growing, but the skill set is improving. And we saw a different level of stand-up against Pat Sabatini there. And now Pat Sabatini, unfortunately, yeah, you bring up a great point. We're not going to get Lopez at plus money anymore. Interesting, though. Interesting stuff. Now, let's see. So as far as belts go and who's going to be holding the belts at the end of the year, one of my predictions here that I know it may come as a shock to some folks, but I believe that Brandon Royval is really going to bring the fight to Alejandro Pantoja. And I think that is a situation where at almost plus 200 or so, I think that Royval, I know we saw that fight once already, but I think that Pantoja's days as a champion are numbered here. And Royval, we did see it play out once, but I think that this is a kid who, the motor on Brandon Royval is incredible. And I know he's had his limbs broken in the past. He had a shoulder dislocation during the Moreno fight, and he will go for it. So I'm really looking forward to that fight. I think that Royval's live in that fight. Let's see. Also, something else I wanted to touch on here. I've been breaking down fights for many, 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 many years, and something that is important to me, I don't speak in certainties. I think that when you are listening to folks who give their predictions on YouTube, on Twitter, etc., that it's okay to take a stance to a certain degree, but there are no certainties in this game. And if folks are coming out giving their predictions and they're taking strong stances, they're planting their flag on every single fight, that's a recipe for disaster, because credibility gets thrown out the window. And realistically, we need to look at both sides of every fight. And we live in a world where implied probability is a real thing. And you need to be able to assign implied probability correctly, but also I know there are smash spots, but then to completely discredit an opponent is a problem, especially when you have folks going to the betting window, because there are receipts. There's a track record of there are a lot of folks out there who are wrong more than they're right when they break down these fights. And sometimes if you're very loud and you're breaking down fights, that will draw attention, that may garner views, and you may get more interactions on Twitter. But realistically, I come from the mindset that I want to take an honest view at both sides of every fight and look at paths to victory and paths to defeat. I'm I don't disparage fighters. I respect everybody who steps into the octagon, and also folks who take time to break down fights and also put their hard-earned money on fighters. They have some skin in the game as well. And if you're advising others on who to bet, there's a level of homework that needs to be put in before going to the airwaves as well. So I just felt I need to put that out there as well. So beware of handicappers who speak in certainties and who take extremely strong stances on fights. And if they're wrong, some folks will just go scurry, and you won't hear from them. You hear about the wins, but you don't necessarily hear about the losses. A lot of folks don't own their losses. And the other thing is, folks aren't necessarily humbled. And this is the fight game, and also the handicapping game is can be a very humbling experience, especially if you're at this for some time. Experience speaks volumes, and maturity comes from experience. There are a lot of folks who are coming in to the not only the Twitter world but the handicapping world, guns blazing, and they try to spout off extremely strong takes, and they could potentially say you're an idiot or use some vulgarity out there to describe folks who are on the opposite side of a fight. But that isn't how we should conduct ourselves. I believe there's honor and respect and dignity, not only in the community here, but also to the fighters themselves as well. So I felt it's important to put that out there. It's okay to plant your flag, but then also to realize that there are consequences after the fight where folks could go back and say, you know what, you were wrong about that one. You were very wrong about that one. And we need to realize that there are no certainties in this game. You're correct. You can't see into the future, and I believe that taking a measured approach every time out is important. So you don't want to go out and risk 10, 12, etc. percent, 15% of a bankroll on one specific spot. Unless you could potentially put yourself in a dangerous situation by doing that. So pick your spots. That's my approach. I know there are many different ways to approach this, but my take, and I come from a good place here too. I think if you come in peace and you try to help steer folks in the right direction, that's a really important part of the process too. And personally, I spend 20, 30 hours a week breaking down these fights, getting ready for each fight card, and it's an important part of the process to provide an honest assessment for each fight. So just wanted to put that out there. So great fight card coming up. I do lean the Brendan Allen side, but I'm not willing to go out and play. I think he's currently sitting at minus 350 or so this upcoming weekend here. So and Paul Craig is potentially live, but I'm not necessarily a believer in his abilities down at middleweight. I know he's got a great record, but you're matching him up with somebody who is a great grappler, has a solid gas tank. Granted, Brendan Allen, we've seen him chin check before, and he also has a tendency to go right into the bear trap at times, and no pun intended. So I think that there's a potential for both fighters to walk away victorious there, but that I'm leaning towards the Brendan Allen side in that matchup. But just wanted to put that all out there. Want to wish everybody a fantastic fight week, UFC Vegas 82, and it's been a pleasure to talk not only the two division champs, talk a little bit about belt predictions for the year, talk about some betting process and my approach from a dollar cost average approach, mentioning that there's no shame in passing on a play also. I think that's really important, an important take-home point. So pick your spots, and this is a long game. So you want to continue to build and get better every time out. So have a great rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you. Take care, folks.